Hello, dear viewer, Noah here, and today I would like to talk about the indie web movement, or what I like to call the renaissance of new old websites. If you're anything like me, you might be getting a little bit tired of the modern internet that we all live in, with these social media platforms and algorithms and all of the doom scrolling, all of the bland, every profile looks the same sort of corporate nature of all of it. And maybe you wish that there was a more colorful place online. Maybe you have heard about the early web, or maybe you were there to experience it yourself, like I was. There was a time before social media where everybody had their own personal homepages, and they would decorate them with colorful background images and animated GIFs and guest books and visitor counters. And we had our own ways of networking our websites together, before Facebook, before Twitter, before all the stuff that we have nowadays. And the good news is that if you're feeling like this, then you're not alone. There's actually a growing movement lately of people that are kicking it old school and making their own personal homepages, and they're joining what is called the indie web movement. And so, what is the indie web? There's this website with resources to learn about it, indieweb.org. It's not a social network in the traditional sense. It's more of a methodology, a set of best practices, and some tutorials and software and things to basically empower you to make your own personal homepage. So their introduction here, it says the indie web is a people-focused alternative to the corporate web. It's a community of independent and personal websites based on the principles of owning your own domain and using it as your primary online identity, and then publishing on your own site first, optionally and elsewhere. In the modern era, it's still useful to cross-post on Twitter and Blue Sky and Instagram, but you have your own personal homepage, your own slice of the internet that you publish on first, and this way you have complete ownership of your content. We've all heard stories where people got deplatformed, or like a social network changes their terms of service and starts just banning whole cohorts of the population off their platform. And when you have your own domain and your own website, and that's where your primary home is on the internet, you can survive such social media purges, and you can keep on doing your thing and have a lot more ownership over your online presence. And so IndieWeb, it has some of these core ideals, like your content is yours. When you post something on the web, it should belong to you, not a corporation. Many companies have gone out of business and lost all their users' data. And so if you set up your own website and join kind of the indie web movement, your content stays yours and it stays in your control. And the indie web isn't a lonely place either. Even back in the day, we used to have things like RSS feeds where we could subscribe and follow each other's blog posts, and we had things like guest books where we could comment on each other's pages directly. In the modern era, there's a lot more possibilities for this. You can write a little plugin for your site that allows you to cross-post immediately to other platforms. There's some new network protocols where you can get feedback and connection between your site and other personal homepages written by your friends online. The primary benefit of having your own website is you being in control of the entire thing. You're not beholden to another company's terms of service. You can, write freely within reason. You can decorate your page to look like anything you want, and you're not going to be surprised one day when you log in and a website has totally overhauled their user experience and changed things around that you don't like. When you put your own website together yourself, it's exactly the way that you want it, and you're in complete control of it. Now, some of you watching this video might have never known a time before Facebook and before all these other social networking sites. For myself, I'm a millennial, and so I was about 12 years old in the year 2000, which is when my family first got internet for our home computers. And the early 2000s especially was sort of the heyday for the classic old web period. This was long before Facebook. It was even before MySpace, which was a social network, before Facebook, and I can show a little bit of that as well. And so my first internet connection back in 2000 was on dial-up, and so that was a very slow way to experience the internet. We used an ISP called Juno, and Juno happened to be incubating a small little company called Homestead, which they were building a website builder tool where you can visually kind of drag and drop and lay out a homepage. And that was my first experience making a website on my own, just kind of visually putting it together. Homestead eventually grew up and become a whole proper company on their own. Um, but as I was kind of exploring the early web and seeing other people's cool little websites that they had hosted on places like GeoCities or Tripod or Angelfire, some of these homepages, people kind of brag about how they learned HTML properly and they were writing their websites from source code, and I thought that was a really cool idea. And so I had some of my uh, early websites that I made. I can actually show one of the first ones that I made that I still actually have to this day. Um, so this website, it's called Cyrus, which was just my username at the time that I liked to use on the internet. And this website was a Myst fan site, and I had put this website together when I was only 13 years old. And so I have this homepage here with like a Myst linking book, and then there's a little panel here you click on to enter the site. And this was basically just being a Myst fan site. I had things about like some kind of tips and spoilers, and um, I think I had somewhere in here there's um, some images about like the Dunny language from Riven and all that kind of fun stuff. And then on the About section, this is how I found out that I made this website back when I was 13 years old and still living back home in Michigan. I'm talking about AOL Instant Messenger and MSN Messenger. Good old nostalgic stuff. I think some of the pages on the site don't work anymore. Another old website that I made back in the day that managed to survive all these years is this one here. I call it Eleanor Universe. It stands for the Land of No Return, which is a story idea that I first came up with when I was about 12 years old in sixth grade. And I kind of fleshed the story out for several years, and the elements of the story kind of incorporate all of my favorite things as a kid growing up. And so, there are elements that are kind of inspired by Pokemon. And so this one had various creatures that I made up, and you would kind of catch them and pit them against each other. And had some elements of like Dragon Ball Z where some characters would get a little thing that kind of powers them up and makes them glow a little bit, maybe a little bit like Super Sonic from Sonic the Hedgehog. And I used to actually write a fair amount of stuff on this. So this old website used to have Adobe Flash applets, which I was able to revive in 2026 using Ruffle.rs, which is it's a modern Flash player that's written in Rust, and you can just add it to your website and get old Flash objects to load again. And so on the Land of No Return, I had handful of stories written up. Like here was my kind of attempt at a novel, which is actually a complete end-to-end story. I haven't read it in a super long time. It's probably cringe AF. But yeah, and then as was kind of the standard of the time, there's a lot of silly little web games on here that you could play as well. And so having cool little personal homepages like this used to just be the standard online, and it kind of seemed like everyone on the internet had their own little page that they would decorate and kind of talk about their interests and hobbies and cool stuff that they're up to. One of the earliest social networking sites that kind of marks the transition from then into the modern era was a site called MySpace. And MySpace no longer exists anymore, but in recent years, some nostalgic people got together and started building some kind of modern, like new clones of old websites like this. And so this one here is called SpaceHey, and it's a fairly faithful recreation of MySpace. It's got like forums, and you can kind of browse around and see people chatting. And one of the sort of unique things about MySpace compared to the modern social networks was that we were still allowed to put HTML on our pages and sort of decorate them and make them very, very personalized. So I can show you like my profile page here, and mine's a little bit tame as far as some MySpace profiles go. Like even back in the day, you would go to someone's profile and there'd be like special effects, things kind of animating across the screen. They might have like 20 like YouTube videos embedded. This was of course the old YouTube, but you would just have a whole bunch of just nonsense going on. I'm gonna actually just browse around a little bit and see if I can find any interesting profile. The ones that have anime pictures tend to be the most reliable ones to find the most kind of creative pages on the internet. So yeah, this guy's got a whole entire animation when his page loads. A cool glassy background effect, GIFs and things. Let's try one of these other anime avatars and see what this page looks like. Yeah, so this is kind of a good example here of just all sorts of nonsense happening. And this was kind of like the standard back in the MySpace days. And when Facebook came out, people were a little bit excited about it actually, because like some of these pages on MySpace were just ridiculous, and having a clean, unified kind of what we would call now a bland corporate aesthetic, it was a little bit of a relief at the time, but then that sort of set the trajectory of like everything on the internet since then has been that sort of bland corporate aesthetic. And as people are getting kind of tired of that again, it comes back full circle and people are coming back to things like MySpace. But for me anyway, like even as Facebook and Twitter and everything started to catch on, I already had my own personal home pages, and I kind of kept that spirit alive for myself all this time. And so my main personal homepage and tech blog is cursal.net. And I've had this domain consecutively since 2005, and it's more or less always kind of looked really pretty with like a custom background image. And I have like a page here where I capture some of my past web designs, which shows iterations of how this site has evolved over time. And I kind of landed on this solar theme with like a custom background image. Even going back to like the Internet Explorer 6 days, so like around 2008 or whatever. And there was a couple of other sites before I called it Cursal. I called it Cuvo, and this was an early web design that I had built, probably back in like 2005 or 6 actually. And so like cursal.net has always been kind of colorful, and people have given me compliments on it over the years, saying that like compared to most minimalistic blogs they come across where it's all just plain black and white, like no flair or color to it, they've always thought it was kind of neat what I was doing here. And something I've always kept around is the classic idea of a guest book. Early websites had guest books where your visitors could stop by and say hello, and I've always liked that idea, so I've had kept that around all this time. And so to get back into the modern era with the indie web movement, I had first started hearing about this stuff in the last couple of years. And in addition to, SpaceHey coming back and bringing back MySpace, I had seen this site called Neocities, which sort of brings back the spirit of GeoCities, which was an early free website host where a lot of these really creative sites were living. And so Neocities is a home to a lot of these cool sites, and you can kind of browse and look around at them. And all this kind of stuff has gotten me really excited and sort of nostalgic for the early web. And so in the last year or two, I created what I call my modern retro homepage. And I have a link to it from my SpaceHey profile here. So this one, I just called it Noah's site because I had this domain name noahs.site that I've just been sitting on for a few years and hadn't been doing anything with. So I was like, this is a good opportunity for it. And my kind of main theme for this site was that I wanted it to look like a classic, like early 2000s website. So it has, what appears to be a table-based layout with these, gray ridges between all the different sections. Because in the old days we didn't have like CSS grid, and we had to use like HTML table tags to lay everything out. And so these sorts of table-based layouts are very common with old websites. But since I'd also made a whole career out of doing web development, I couldn't live with myself if I went completely old school, because like I know that most devices on the internet are smartphones, and table-based layouts tend not to work very well on smartphones because tables have a certain width to them, and you can't compress them very much without having like a scroll bar across the bottom of the page, and that's a terrible experience on mobile. And so as I was trying to make this site look like it has a table-based layout, I actually used modern responsive web design standards. And so somebody loads this page on mobile, and I have it adapt accordingly, so it changes into this kind of single column layout, which is super easy to read. And then I have a menu button up here that then slides in my left navigation bar. And so then this way, like the website is accessible on mobile. If people kind of come to my about page or whatever, they can read my site and everything still works correctly. But of course, for the best experience, I designed it for like a full desktop size display. So that you have like a whole like 3-column table-based layout thing. I have an old school visitor counter over here. And then you may be wondering about this ripple effect I have in the background. And one thing that I remember from the early web days was the prevalence of Java applets. So this was even before like the Adobe Flash days. And web design was very primitive. We had just HTML and not much else. And you could embed Java applets onto your page to make them do some more dynamic things. And I remember having a Java applet where you could load a picture into it, and then it would do like a dynamic water ripple effect. And if you like clicked on it, you could like leave little ripples. And I wanted to sort of capture that aesthetic on the site as well. But given that this is a modern website for modern browsers, I'd found some JavaScript that uses web GPU to like render these ripple effects on your graphics card. And in case somebody's device is getting warm in their hand, or their computer just can't really cope with it that much, I have a little checkbox over here on the right where you can turn off the water ripple effects. And then this makes the site just be a little bit more kind of static without, burning through your graphics card and killing your battery life. But the theme that I was going with for this site was to sort of make it a time capsule and a museum for some of my own like artwork and stuff that I created back in the early web era. So I have things on here. I have a guest book using. I found like a provider at attabook.org that is embed here, because this site is hosted on Neocities, and Neocities is they do static website hosting, so like just HTML, JavaScript, CSS, but no like server-side scripting. So I can't program my own guest book very easily. But what we used to do back in the day with that kind of thing is we would just embed services like this one in little frames inside of our own site. But on my Modern Retro homepage, I have pages here that show some of my 3D artwork that I used to create back in like AutoCAD and 3D Studio Max. I took some CAD classes in high school and kind of taught myself how to do some of this stuff. I have some old Flash animations that I had created back in the day, and I have some of those on here. And thanks to Ruffle.rs, I'm able to bring these Flash applets back to life. I'm not going to play these now because they're long and have a lot of noise on them, and you can check it out in your own time if you're curious. I I have a page here with just some artwork that I had drawn back when I was a kid. Like a lot of these were drawn using Adobe Flash because it was just a very great vector artwork tool. I used to make some custom desktop wallpapers about some of my story ideas. I made a handful of buddy icons for like AOL and MSN Messenger. I even have some of my cringe old poetry that I wrote back in high school. So a lot of fun stuff. So this is kind of my my modern retro homepage. And even more recently than this, I actually built a proper old school website. And this one is at throwback.cursal.net. And this website is specifically about things like Windows 3.1 through Windows 98. And so it's got like resources for like old operating systems and how to get them running again on modern computers. I've got a bookmarks page with some really cool sites that I found about like how you can get these old like web browsers from like Windows 3.1 to be able to access the modern internet. And it's really rough trying to get directly on the internet, but there's like a text-based search engine that lets you access basically modern content. And there's a few just interesting things here that I have linked. And so this new old website is actually literally a table-based layout because I wanted this site to like literally work inside of like Internet Explorer 5.0 on Windows 3.1 from the year 1993. And old browsers, like, they just cannot cope with the modern web whatsoever. And it was sort of a fun exercise to design a modern website in, I think I made this one in 2026. And so if you are feeling inspired by any of this, how do you get started? Like, what are some resources to learn about HTML and how to make your own websites? And I have a couple that I can recommend to you. The first one is the w3schools.com HTML tutorial. This was a site that I learned HTML from myself way back in the day. They have tutorials on other things like JavaScript and CSS. So this is like a good simple resource to get started, and they have interactive examples where you can click on try it yourself and you can sort of play with the code and then see how it translates over here. A more modern resource that I heard about, which is also great for learning HTML, is the Mozilla Developer Network, the MDN docs. They have some guides on here for like absolute beginners, like if you've never written any code in your life. They can kind of teach you how to get set up and how to write your first HTML web page. And I read through some of this to sort of get an idea of like what the content looks like if I was going to recommend it to like a brand new person who wants to make their first website. And there's a lot of really solid advice in here. I'm going to drop some links to all these down in the description below this video. And speaking of this video, if you like this content, please give the video a like and subscribe to my channel. It'll really help me out, and it will help this video find its audience on YouTube. And if you're interested in this stuff, other people probably are as well, and that really helps the channel out. So you can like learn HTML and play with websites just locally on your computer, but then you need to like host them somewhere online. And where can you do that? And a good first place to start could actually just be Neocities here. You can sign up a free account, and then you just upload your website to it, and you can host these on here. My top advice though would be to always keep your website files locally on your computer and then upload them somewhere. Neocities has like an HTML editor directly on their site, and some people will just work on their page directly on Neocities. But that's a little bit risky, just in case, like if your account was like banned for any reason or anything like that. If there's anything that we learned from all these decades of social media, it's that these platforms can kind of come and go at any time, and if all of your stuff lives on their services, then you're at their whim to safeguard them for you, and if they delete all your stuff, you have no recourse. And so I would just recommend editing your sites locally. And the Mozilla documents here, they'll tell you how to get set up with a text editor, they're going to recommend Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. That's a very solid editor. That's what real developers use. That's what I used to do in my day job. But the important thing is you work on your site locally on your computer. You upload it somewhere to Neocities or other web host. There's a lot of free options out there for static website hosting. And if you need any help with like learning HTML, or like if you run into some questions and you want to chat with some people and get some help on your sites, there's a lot of great communities online where you can do this at. So like on Reddit, there's an rhtml subreddit, and so you have people like saying they just started to code, and they come on here and ask their questions. Like someone's asking about implementing custom card layouts. Saw one on here where people were talking about like rate my website, or help with like having some scroll bar issues on their page. And this is a little bit nostalgic for me because like I learned HTML back in the early 2000s, and I used to hang out on forums like this, and I would ask questions and learn from the community. And it's sort of great in the modern era to see this sort of renaissance of new old websites popping up, and people learning HTML for the first time and asking these sorts of questions that I haven't seen these asked in a very long time. And it's just great to see that the kids are learning to code again. And so there's a lot of great resources out there. So I think that'll probably do it for today. If you've learned anything from this video, or if you feel inspired to make your own personal homepage, let me know in the comments below. If you leave a link, that'd be great. I would love to see what you guys come up with. And if you have a guest book on your page, I would love to stop by and sign it and say hello. And if you like this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to be posting some more videos about like early web stuff and a lot of general nostalgic things that I'm into. Might also include some topics about like some retro video games, and just I'm a 90s kid myself, and so that whole like 90s and early 2000s era is near and dear to my heart. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming. So until next time, I'm Noah, and thank you for watching my video.